Welcome to Hurt at Work, a Kentucky workers' comp podcast. Today, Louisville workers' compensation attorney Scott Scheynost is going to provide helpful information, tips, and advice for injured workers and their families. Scott's goal is to help you to maximize the benefits you receive. If working's got you hurting, sit back and listen to Scott address topics that matter to you. Friends, welcome to Hurt at Work, a Kentucky workers' comp podcast. This is episode 1 of the podcast put together by Louisville workers' compensation attorney Scott Scheynost. Scott, welcome. Congratulations on launching your new podcast.
I'm happy to be here.
Buddy, this is going to be a lot of fun. We've known each other for probably 10, 12 years. You've done a lot of work over throughout the state. And it's just, we've done a lot of different things to help people get to know you and to help people get to know your practice. And I'd like to spend a few minutes in this introduction of episode 1, letting people get to know you, and then we'll jump into some other topics that they may be wondering about right now. You're a local guy. I mean, and in this age of TV advertisements, that's not always the case, but you grew up here. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure did. I'm a Louisville boy, grew up, born and raised here, have practiced in Louisville my entire life. I grew up in the southwest part of town. I went to Jesse Stewart High School out there, and I've been practicing in PRP probably since 1996.
That's about right, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Well, now you didn't always start in workers' comp. You had a different career in law prior to coming over to workers' comp on the plaintiff or the injured victim side. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, when I went to law school, I actually clerked for some of the best attorneys in the state of Kentucky, and then after that, I started working for a couple of firms that did mainly what we call defense work, which means they either represented insurance companies or big employers. And at those firms, my job was to make sure that the big employers and the insurance companies kept their money. Basically, I was dealing with a lot of folks that I grew up with, and my job seemed to be to not help them. I didn't like that. I eventually went out on my own, and I think this is more of my calling, being able to help people that have been hurt and try to make their lives a little bit better and assist them in what they do as opposed to helping the insurance companies.
Well, for people that are just listening, just starting to get to know you, I mean, again, we've worked together off and on. I do business development marketing and things like that for you. The opportunity for us to work with a number of different attorneys, so many people have such a great recommendation or a great opinion of you. And it just, I love doing these kind of things with people who really know the game, really know their craft. And, but you've got a stellar reputation out there. And it's, yes, you've done both sides of it, but the work you've done has been noted.
Well, I appreciate that. That's nice of you to say. We've been doing this for a while, so it's nice to have somebody recognize that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, so why did you get into law school? Why did you decide to go to law school and get into this profession? It's not the easiest of ways to make a living.
No, it's not. I was always fascinated by the law and thought this was a good opportunity to take a challenge and run with it, and also be able to help people eventually in the long run with my skills. And I think that's all worked out. It is challenging. The law changes almost every day. Everybody's got a different set of problems that needs to be resolved, and it always keeps you on your toes, and we enjoy doing what we're doing.
Now, as undergrad, you went to Eastern Kentucky, so you're a colonel, but you went right here to U of L to law school, right?
Yeah, my undergraduate school was in Richmond, Kentucky at Eastern Kentucky University, and enjoyed that. Then I worked for a little bit and then went to law school at the University of Louisville afterwards. I thought I'd end up in Louisville, so I went to law school there, and I did. But my roots are here in Louisville. That's why I'm back. I went to law school because I'm from Louisville. And I thought I'd always stay in Louisville, and we have. So I've enjoyed working here. At one time, there was a discussion among the family about going somewhere else, but I'm a Louisville, Kentucky boy, and I'm going to stay here probably till they pry me out of the ground.
Now, what was it about workers' compensation law that kind of encouraged you to kind of go that direction with your career? I mean, the law is a broad area. I mean, you can get into all sorts of different things. What was it about workers' comp that really kind of attracted you?
Well, I enjoy workers' compensation for a couple of reasons. First of all, you get to deal with individual people and their problems and try to assist them. So I'm not sitting there trying to do securities exchange registrations or some very, very technical work that doesn't involve working with people. So you've got a lot of personal contact with your clients. And the second thing about it is it's fascinating to me. Everybody's got a different situation. Everybody has a different problem that needs to be solved, and we try to put all our skill sets together to solve those problems. So I enjoy working with folks. This puts me right in the middle of working with folks. I get to talk to my clients several times a day, and I really enjoy that personal contact with them.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Now, even though that you're based here in Louisville, with workers' compensation, I mean, you handle cases across the Commonwealth, right?
I'm admitted to practice in Kentucky and Indiana. I mainly do workers' compensation claims in Kentucky, and that means all over the state. I think I got a call from somebody that got injured at one of the colleges outside of Louisville a couple days ago. I'm not able to talk about all the facts of the case,
Yeah.
but it's several hours away from Louisville. We're able to help them. In fact, if you have a workers' compensation claim that's a Kentucky claim, even if it happens in Arkansas, if you're working for a Kentucky employer, you're driving a truck, have a car accident in Arkansas, I can still help you with that. And I have several clients all over the state of Kentucky, eastern, western. Most of them are in Louisville. A lot of them are around Lexington, northern Kentucky.
Yep.
So if it's a Kentucky workers' compensation claim, I can help you. Doesn't matter where you're at. Most of this stuff is done basically through forms and internet communications. So we can take care of most every situation, no matter where you're located, if it is a Kentucky claim.
Now, if it's workers' compensation qualified, meaning it's something that I can file a claim. Basically, I got hurt on the job. This is an injury related to something I was doing in the normal performance of my job.
That's
official duties,
the
right?
major criteria is that you're an employee and that you actually are hurt at your work. There's a lot of exceptions to that general rule.
Yeah, sure.
I don't think we have time to talk about all those exceptions today. But if you just think of that, if you're at work and while working you get hurt as a result of your job, then you probably have a workers' compensation claim. Big, small, in between, you probably have a claim. And at that point, you don't want to forget that you have the option of having workers' compensation help you out. You don't
Right.
always have to use your own health insurance. You don't always have to depend on your savings to get you through. You might have benefits available through workers' compensation that might be able to assist you. If there's ever a question about whether or not it's a workers' compensation claim, I'd highly advise you to talk to somebody that knows whether or not it is, either me or some other attorney. We generally handle these cases on what's called a contingency fee, which means we don't charge you unless we help you. And generally, I'll try to answer some phone call questions when you call in, and I think in a few minutes you'll know whether or not you have a claim. But if you think you have a claim, you probably do, and you probably need to ask somebody if you want to make sure.
Right. So coming back to that contingency fee, I mean, basically, it doesn't cost me. You're not working on an hourly basis.
Correct.
I mean, if you win the case for your client, your fee comes out of the back end of that, right?
That's right.
The client doesn't have to worry about paying you along the way.
Correct. You don't have to worry about calling me. If you call my office, we're not going to put you on the clock and charge you. If you meet with me, it's a free consultation, and if you don't want to hire me, there's no charge involved in it. We take these on what's called a contingency fee. That means we don't recover any money unless we get money for you. So there's actually no charge involved to you to come and see me and for us to handle your case. Generally, most folks, I'll be honest with you, that handle workers' compensation claims as attorneys handle them in that way. But I think the bottom line to take out all that stuff is it doesn't hurt to call. It's not going to cost you any money. And it's generally free information you're going to get from somebody. So why wait? Go ahead and make the call and try to figure out if you've got a case and if it needs to be pursued.
Right. I think maybe down the road in a future episode we'll talk a little bit about the attorney's fees and how those work and kind of how that's established. But those are capped for a lot of what you do. So it's the workers' comp laws are meant to help the injured worker, which is a nice thing.
Yeah, the workers' compensation system in Kentucky is an abbreviated system of what we call the tort system, which means it's supposed to be a little bit faster and easier to get benefits in workers' compensation than it would be from something like a slip and fall or say a car accident. That doesn't mean it's always fast, and it doesn't mean you don't have to fight for benefits, but it's essentially an abbreviated system. And because it's an abbreviated system, a lot of the attorney's fees are capped in it. For instance, right now, injuries after 2018 have an attorney's fee cap of $18,000. So if I'm able to get you $2 million in a workers' compensation claim, the most I can charge as a fee is $18,000.
Right, which is just a percent or two. I mean, it's minimum compared to a car wreck attorney who's probably going to charge you a third, which is 33%, up to 40%.
Or more, yes.
Or more,
yeah.
right,
and,
right. So,
and there's other things they can charge too in those cases that we can't charge in workers' compensation claims.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the types of cases that you take on. I mean, when I think of workers' comp, I think of somebody on the line that maybe gets involved with something and they fall down or something happens and they hurt them, they strain a back or a neck. Or maybe break a bone somewhere. Those are the things I think about. But workers' comp's a lot broader than that, isn't it?
Right. Those are the obvious cases when you're at work and something falls on you or you trip over a cord or something like that. But there's other cases too. For instance, you might be in a car and you might be a traveling salesman and you might be in Missouri trying to sell something for an employer in Kentucky and you have a car accident. Well, that's probably a Kentucky workers' compensation claim too. It might be a couple other things. You may have a lawsuit because of the car accident against the party that hit you, but you also have a workers' compensation claim.
Because you were on the clock at the time. You were doing work for the company.
Correct, and it's a little bit too detailed to get into
Sure,
whether or not
sure.
that's a claim or not, but if you're working for somebody again and you get hurt at work, that's a claim. Other claims that come up that people don't always realize are what we call repetitive motion type injuries. For instance, you're working in a factory and you're doing the same job every day where you have to move one part from one part of the table to another, and you do that maybe 1,000 times a day. Well, eventually that could wear out part of your body, your hands, your wrists, your arms, your shoulders.
Back.
Your back too, yes.
Yeah.
And that's what we call a repetitive motion type injury. It's not a traumatic injury. Nothing fell on top of you. You didn't fall off the ledge. And it basically, every time you do that duty, that job, it causes some kind of mini trauma to your body. And eventually, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. Eventually, your body wears out and you've got to seek some medical attention. So that also can be work-related. If your work contributed to the wear and tear of your body, that's real typical for things what we call carpal tunnel syndrome, and like you mentioned earlier, some back cases, sometimes knee cases.
Yeah.
But if work contributed to the injury, there's a good chance that is also a workers' compensation claim.
I mean, we've talked about even in healthcare, a nurse trying to move a patient, roll them over so they can change the bed linens and stuff like that. You can throw a back out. You can cause some back and neck trauma. That's workers' comp.
That is, and I've actually got about two or three of those cases going on right now.
Yeah, it's not just stuff that happens in a manufacturing scenario.
Correct. The main nexus is the connection to work. If you're at work and work causes some kind of an injury, then that usually is work-related, and that usually requires workers' compensation to take care of it, whether or not your employer wants to or not.
Right. And that's where you come in.
Right. Some employers don't recognize this. My personal experience has been the smaller the employer, the harder it is for them to understand that you may have a work-related injury. The bigger the employer, they've seen this before, and they'll usually deal with repetitive motion injuries a little bit differently. But small employers, if you're working in a machine shop with 3 or 4 guys, and you hurt your back, and you may have a herniated disc in your back that requires surgery, but it doesn't show up. It doesn't have a laceration. You're not cut. There's no blood coming out. The bone's not broken. Nothing's punching out of your skin.
Hard to see it.
You can't see it. You have to have an X-ray or MRI to see it. So, your boss there, the shop foreman, thinks you're faking it, and he's not hurt. Nothing's broken. He's not bleeding. He's just making this up. You may not be able to walk, but he doesn't think you're hurt. Generally, in the small shops like that, where the people think they know what's going on, there's usually a problem, and we've got to work around that. Usually the bigger employers are used to dealing with this, and it's not that big of an issue, but there's a lot of employers that think they know what causes injuries that don't. And I think the bottom line on that, again, is to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. Just don't take what your employer says for granted. Your employer has a lot of incentives not to report a workers' compensation claim.
Right. Now, if I own a company in Kentucky and I have employees, am I required to carry workers' comp? I mean,
yes,
regardless of the size of a company I work for, there's coverage out there for the employee.
That's correct. If you have one employee, you've got to have workers' compensation for them. And in fact, that's the law. The employer can be fined up to $1,000 a day for each employee that doesn't have workers' compensation.
That's per day.
Per day.
Wow.
Per employee. So that can be pretty significant real fast. But you still run into a lot of employers that don't have it. And in those situations, if your employer doesn't have workers' compensation, there's actually a government agency that will pay the injured workers benefits. That's a little bit more complicated to get. You have to file a formal claim. You'd have to have an attorney probably to pursue that. But there is a way to get benefits, even if your employer doesn't have workers' compensation coverage. And then what I run into is a lot of employers classify people as not being employees. For instance, if you're working for a builder, and the builder says you're labor, I'm just going to pay you labor. I'm going to pay you $10 an hour. I'm not going to take any wages out of this. I'm sorry, not going to take any taxes out of this. I'm going to give you a 1099 at the end of the year because you're just labor. Well, you're probably actually an employee there, and the employer is probably not handling it properly. And there's a good chance that if you get injured in that type of position, that workers' compensation would cover it, even though you're getting a 1099 and even though taxes aren't being taken out and even though your employer classifies you as an independent contractor.
Right.
So, you have to look at the job more than the way you're paid.
Okay.
If you're a doctor and you're charging somebody a fee to look at him, well, he's probably an independent contractor. If somebody hires you to come over and assist them putting up a roof and you've worked there for 2 or 3 days and you're getting paid $10 an hour, that's probably an employee, even though you're getting a 1099.
Right. Well, let's transition a little bit and talk about some misconceptions. I mean, as we were preparing for this episode, we came up with really there are probably three common misunderstandings that a person who's injured may have that you've almost got to kind of re-educate them about.
Yeah, and really the first one is there's a lot of insurance companies out there that don't have your best interest at heart. When you have a workers' compensation claim, their job as they view it is not to make you better. Their job as they view it is to minimize the cost.
Yeah.
And that's not always in your best interest. And I think a lot of people need to understand that. A lot of folks think that if they have a workers' compensation claim, it's just like having a health insurance claim. The insurance is going to pay for everything. I'm not going to have any problems with this. But the workers' compensation insurance carriers aren't governed by the same set of laws that govern health insurance carriers. And the workers' compensation insurance carriers are more sensitive to the costs because they have to pay those costs on, pass those costs on to your employer. And usually the employer has a lot of feedback about what's being done as far as the treatment. And there's usually a lot more incentive from the workers' compensation insurance company not to pay for things, not to pay for medical treatment, not to pay for lost wages, not to pay for permanent disability benefits. And I think people need to understand that the insurance company is not there to help them. They may send somebody to go to the doctor's office with you. You think that person's trying to get you health care. That person's job really is to minimize the cost for the insurance company.
Yeah, that insurance company doesn't work for the injured person.
Correct.
It works for the company.
Correct. And it's a lot more adversarial than your regular health insurance.
Yeah.
And I think you need to be aware of that when you go into a workers' compensation claim, that these folks don't have my best interests at heart. My experience has been most people don't want to file a workers' compensation claim, and I understand that. They don't want to upset the apple cart. They don't want to make their boss mad at them.
Right.
A lot of folks don't have that option. And if you have a serious injury, then all this becomes a lot more important. If you just have a minor incident and you turn it into your health insurance, you know, the insurance carrier for the workers' compensation insurance company is going to be happy about that. That's a cost they don't have. But if you've got a serious injury, you really need to make sure that you have your best interests at heart and you aren't being led down the wrong path by the workers' compensation insurance carrier. And they do that in a lot of different ways. They'll tell you that you have to go to the company doctors, which is not the law in Kentucky. I've had 3 people call me this week that were told they had to go to the company doctor to get treatment. That's not the law in Kentucky. It is in other states, but it's not in Kentucky.
So I can choose where I want to go.
And that's probably the best piece of legal advice I'll ever give you is that you want to pick the doctor. Don't let the company pick the doctor. There's a reason the company, the insurance company, picks a doctor that they want you to treat with. And that's generally because it's going to minimize their cost.
Yeah, and I think we've planned out an episode to really kind of get into that topic in depth.
I can talk about that for hours.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, because it's a misconception. You think they're taking care of you. No, they're, again, trying to get you back on the line or wherever and minimize their cost exposure.
Well, it's a dollar thing for
always.
the insurance company and the employer. At some point, it's just dollars. And if you're costing them dollars, they don't like it, and they'll start looking for ways to minimize the cost. It's just like anything else.
Well, I think the second general misunderstanding that people probably have is the speed at which this case is going to go. I mean, I know you said it's kind of an abbreviated system, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a fast system. Is that right?
Well, it's faster than a normal lawsuit, but it's still not always fast. A lot of these benefits are designed to be paid after the injury without any kind of intervention by attorneys or administrative law judges or anybody like that. And a lot of times that happens. You know, you have a work-related injury, they pick it up, they start paying for stuff, everything's going okay. But at some point, you know, they've decided not to pay for a surgery, they've decided that you didn't get hurt at work. At some point when there's a dispute about it and they're not paying for benefits, then that's going to be a disputed case. If we have to file a claim, normally we have to file documents with the Department of Workers' Claims. That takes a while to go in front of an administrative law judge. He issues a proof schedule, and it's usually about 9 months to a year before you actually get a decision from a judge.
Yeah.
And we try to do things that prevent that from taking so long. We'll try to get your evidence together, present it to the insurance company, tell them that they're idiots for not paying this, and try to get your case resolved sooner because that's always better for you. That always gets your benefits sooner and actually reduces your costs too.
But at the same time, I mean, they've got to complete some medical treatment, and that could drag on for a while. There could be some surgeries. And
in workers' compensation claims, we really don't know how big of a case you have until you're done with medical treatment.
Right.
It's a magical point called maximum medical improvement. And if you had a work-related injury that causes a back problem, and you have surgery for that back problem, then you've got to recover from that surgery. And after you recover from that surgery, we get an impairment rating, and that's what we use to determine how much your case is worth. So if you got hurt today and went and saw the doctors, and 4 months from now they decided to do a surgery, and then you're off work for 6 months because of the surgery,
Rehab
and then
and
we
all that other
take
stuff.
correct, and then we take 2 months for the doctor to give us a report back with an impairment rating. That's a year, and that's really moving fairly fast for those kind of cases.
Yeah.
That's assuming the insurance company doesn't want to argue that you don't have to have the surgery, and in about half the cases they do. That's assuming that the insurance company doesn't want to argue that the doctor's impairment rating is too high, and in probably 3/4 of the cases they normally do.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of things that we can argue about during that, and the bigger the case, the more the arguments and the more incentive for everybody to argue about them. So you might get your medical treatment soon, you might get your benefits for being off work soon, but it might take a while to resolve the claim. Part of it's because you have to recover, and then part of it's because nobody wants to pay you, and we've got to fight to get those benefits for you.
Yeah. The third misunderstanding that kind of surprised me was this issue of pain and suffering.
Yeah, in workers' compensation, you're not typically awarded any money for what we call pain and suffering. If you had a car accident and you had a broken bone, and you had to have that bone set, and you had to wear a cast for 3 months, and you couldn't play golf, baseball, volleyball, basketball for 3 months, and you had to deal with that, and it was aggravating. It was a cast in the middle of summer, and it itched, and you had to put up with all this stuff. Well, that's suffering. That's literally the suffering element of pain and suffering. And in a car accident, you would receive money for that.
Right.
In a workers' compensation claim, though, because this is an abbreviated system, because you don't have to prove whose fault it was, you just have to prove it happened at work, you give up the right to recover pain and suffering. So in that situation where you have a broken bone and it results in a cast, that might be a $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 case, even higher, in a motor vehicle accident. In a workers' compensation claim, you would get some money, 2/3 of your average weekly wage for being off. But if the broken bone didn't result in any permanent impairment rating, that would be all you get.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest misconception. People see folks that had a broken bone, they got $30,000 in a car accident. How come I'm not getting $30,000 in the workers' comp claim?
It's a different plan. It's a different
system of measuring your damages. Some of it makes sense. Most of it doesn't. The legislature has gotten together at different points in time and come up with this system and impairment ratings and how long you get money and how much you get and things like that. And it's just a mismatch. It really, in a lot of cases, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it's the law that we have in Kentucky.
Right.
And different states have different laws. But pain and suffering is probably the biggest misconception my clients have. You may have a surgery from this, and you may get a 2% impairment rating, which may not be much of a case, or much as far as benefits as you would get from it. But that's all you're going to get. Even though you had the surgery, you don't get money for the pain and suffering of going through the surgery in workers' compensation.
Right. And again, it's a different system. It's not like, as you said, a car. Interestingly enough, we've already spoken to a couple of your colleagues, and in some upcoming episodes here, we're going to have a gentleman who actually does car wrecks primarily.
Right.
And you guys will talk together about kind of how those sometimes play together, how those cases can be filed simultaneously, and some of the differences and nuances. But beyond that, we're also going to have somebody on to talk about Social Security benefits as well, which, again, can be filed at the same time and often is.
Right, and I think what is important to remember also about these workers' compensation claims is you may have a workers' compensation claim, but you may also have something else.
Yep.
You may have a car accident that results in this pain and suffering that we were talking about. You may not be able to work any longer because of this injury, and you may have a Social Security disability claim. There may be some other things that probably don't result in as big financial reward, like maybe short-term disability, long-term disability, things like that. But I think it's important to remember if you have a workers' comp claim, it could be something else too. It could be a car accident where you get your pain and suffering. It could be a Social Security claim where you get benefits for a lot longer than workers' compensation. Yeah. And generally, if you're going to talk to an attorney, they're going to be able to recognize it and be able to afford. And that's what happens is if there's something else going on. If you have a products liability action, for instance, because of a work-related injury, we might be able to pursue that. We'll be able to get some other folks involved in this that have some expertise in those areas, and we'll try to figure those things out for you. But it's important to remember that it may be more than a workers' compensation claim.
Right. And you generally need an attorney to help you walk through that and figure out, hey, well, no, wait a minute, there may be another source of benefits or funds here for you, and they can rely on you to kind of navigate those waters with them.
Yeah, and in the last month, probably I've had 3 people that not only had workers' compensation claims, but also had Social Security, pretty decent Social Security claims.
Yeah.
That had no concept that was available for them.
Right. Well, I think a lot of people who don't get representation may be leaving stuff on the table. They may be leaving benefits or they just didn't know.
That's true, and
that's unfortunate. But I mean,
it really is. It's very unfortunate, and there's a lot of benefits out there. But just about anything out there, you're not going to get unless you apply for it. And if you don't know about it, you're not going to be able to apply for it.
Yep. Yep. Well, Scott, let's kind of wrap up with this final question. Could you offer some general advice for someone who's wondering, wow, this happened. Should I actually file a workers' comp claim? How would you advise them?
Well, first of all, if you're wondering that, you probably should. But just to be certain, it doesn't hurt to call me. We handle, again, these cases on a contingency fee, and we're happy to talk to folks. It doesn't cost anything to figure this out. As a general rule, though, the best general rule for filing a workers' compensation claim, assuming that the employer's decided to pay you your benefits for being off work and pay for your medical treatment, and there aren't any disputes regarding that, the general rule about really filing a more significant workers' compensation claim is if you have a permanent problem.
Yeah.
If you have a permanent problem, then you're going to be entitled to additional money for that permanent problem. How much, we don't know. It depends on the problem. And when do you have a permanent problem? Well, that's when usually you've had an operation. That's usually an indication you've had a permanent problem. So if you've had some kind of surgery, you're going to have some kind of permanent problem from that scarring or some tissue damage or something like that. That's usually going to result in an impairment rating. If the doctor tells you, you're going to have to live with this for the rest of your life, that's a pretty good indication you got a permanent problem too.
Right. You're
going to have a limp. You're going to have some kind of a scar taken care of. If something's going to last forever, when you have that permanent problem, you really need to get an attorney involved in the case then, because there's a lot of things that come on the table. In Kentucky, you're eligible for lifetime benefits for medical treatment. You may be able to reopen your case after you've had some change in your condition. There's a lot of things that are on the table that an attorney can help you with. The impairment rating can always be disputed if the doctor computed that properly. That's usually a big basis of how you get money. What I see a lot is probably 25% of the cases the employer has not computed your average weekly wage correctly. And the average weekly wage is based on how much money you've earned in the past before the injury. And if they've computed that lower than it should be, you're getting less money than you should be getting. And generally, they're not going to consider overtime or second job or a couple things like that. So if you've got overtime or if you've had a second job, what we call concurrent employment, your average weekly wage may not have been computed correctly, and you need to have somebody sit down and look at all that stuff. But if you've got a permanent problem, if something's going to last for the rest of your life, you really need to sit down and talk to an attorney. Usually that's a bigger case. Usually there's going to be a lot of things that happen down the road as far as medical treatment. Generally, the employer is going to make an offer that's not worth what your case is worth, and they're going to say take it or leave it. You're going to think, well, here's $10,000 I didn't have yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and take it. Well, your case might be worth a lot more than that.
Right.
And it doesn't hurt to have an attorney look at it. We'll give you our 2 cents on it if it's a fair offer. I'll tell you that. But that's generally when you really need to sit down and talk to an attorney. And if you have a permanent problem, even if you're going through the medical treatment right now, even if you're getting paid money from workers' compensation, I would go ahead and get an attorney involved in it now, because we can speed up the process a little bit. We can go ahead and get your medical records. We can figure out what's going on. We can find out it might have been a safety violation involved in here that might get you some more money. All that stuff takes a little bit of time. If you just walk in the door, it takes us a while to figure out what's going on with your case. We generally got to get your medical records. That usually takes a couple of weeks. So if you've got a permanent problem, go ahead and get an attorney involved in it. They can go ahead and start doing the background work on that. And that probably will end up speeding up your case a little bit. And in general, that's going to help you.
Well, I think one of the big fears is people worry about retaliation. I mean, what happens if I make the company mad because I'm filing this comp case?
Well, companies generally are not going to be happy you file a comp case. That's just the way it is. Now, and we can't do anything about being mad, but when they do retaliate against you, that actually is another law they're violating. And there's specific laws that prevent them from retaliating against you. All of a sudden, you're now the person that cleans out all the restrooms. All of a sudden now, they're not giving you any overtime. All of a sudden now, you've gotten the worst shift out there. If they're doing things like that,
your performance rating, your performance reports start getting dinged, and
you need to sit down and talk to an attorney about that, because that's like a discrimination case. There's specific laws that prevent them from retaliating. You've got to prove that's what's going on. So the more evidence you have of that occurring, if your boss says, I'm not going to let you have any more overtime because you filed this workers' compensation claim, and he says that in front of 4 or 5 witnesses, well, you may have a good retaliation claim.
Yeah.
But there's specific laws that prevent that, and there's a whole set of laws, specific laws in Kentucky. There's also some federal laws, Americans with Disability Act, that might come into play, but there's specific laws that prevent them from retaliating against you.
Good deal. And the good news is, to start, they really ought to just pick up the phone and call you. What is it? Yeah. What's the office phone number, Scott?
502-937-5287 is our office number, and if you call that number, if we're not available, leave a message and we'll get back with you as soon as we can. Generally, during the office day, we're going to be able to take your call and figure out a little bit about what's going on. And I think I'm pretty good about getting back with folks. I'll generally get back with you that day or the next day. But it doesn't hurt to call, and it's a free call. And I don't know what you've got to lose by calling. And even if you don't call me, you probably need to talk to an attorney if you're thinking about it. And most attorneys handle these cases on what we call this contingency fee, so it doesn't usually cost you anything.
And Scott, over the years, you've developed a really nice, informative website. You've got a tremendous amount of information out there, including some frequently asked questions and some examples of different types of injuries, some of the work you've done. Friends, you can find Scott at ScheynostLaw.com. That's ScheynostLaw.com. ScheynostLaw.com. Hey, Scott, let's wrap it up for episode 1. I want to congratulate you. I want to say just once again, I appreciate you putting this information out for people to be able to learn and understand. And if you've found this information helpful, if you found this informative, feel free to share this episode with your family and friends. Feel free to come back. We're going to have an episode about every 2 weeks, just to kind of give you a brief overview of a topic related to workers' comp law and some other topics that you may find helpful and useful. But again, my friend, I want to congratulate you on the conclusion of episode 1. You did a great job.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Friends, we're going to sign off on episode 1 today. This is Hurt at Work, a Kentucky workers' compensation podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode of Hurt at Work. Scott will be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. For more information, be sure to visit ScheynostLaw.com. That's ScheynostLaw.com. You can also follow Scott's Workers' Comp office on Facebook. Until next time, be safe and remember, Scott's ready to help, especially when you and your family need it the most.